So we are back.
It's good to be back with a bar handicap race.
This is the first one we're reviewing.
So do you want to talk about how handicap races work?
So the handicap term is used for the time handicap that's added on the groups. The idea is to have riders of all potential get to the race finish together.
Like the first group that started on this race day started 30 minutes ahead of the last group.
A lot of people registered for bar but didn't turn up. So you can see the last group turns out looking huge.
Which is normally not the case.
Yeah, because that's the fastest group.
Yeah, so the fastest group this time had 11 riders. So we had a tailwind on the way out. So I knew on a tailwind day, you want to keep the speed as close to 50 on the way out because the headwinds on the way back are going to batter you. And a slight change in this course cut the course down to 2 laps of a little past Egypt and back. And we finish not at the normal finish point, but we finish at the end of the falls flat, which is about 3.8 kilometers from the normal finish.
So we've got onboard footage from you, Joel.
My camera, yeah. So this is me falling back just to see what the group looks like. And everybody seems to be there except Gagan. So I asked Rudra, where's Gagan? And he says he had a mechanical. Cut to Gagan at the start line from Shaurya's camera. His chain keeps dropping. I had the best clip-in of my life and immediately was gunning it from the start. So this did not help Gagan's case at all because for the first 5 kilometers, we averaged around 51.5 kilometers an hour. So then I asked the Velo Studio car if they can give him a draft.
Give a draft, no?
Turns out that's already happened.
Right. So this is like it's a good example of when drafts are actually legal.
Yeah.
So when riders have mechanicals or they crash, the support car is allowed to draft them to the back of the peloton.
Yes, but unluckily for him, this is when John was at the front and decides to hammer it. And as you can see here, he's hammering it to the point where I'm getting distance.
Right.
And he doesn't know about this.
So I don't think we've introduced John. John's the new.
John is LBB's latest recruit. He is a very strong Malu boy and he's a current Kerala state champion. Yeah, this is actually his first race for us in Bangalore. And so yeah, you can see him here in the front putting down around 300.
Right. So at this point of time, we see that you're
I'm
behind,
far
right?
behind, yeah, because
and that's like a small statistic on if you lose the wheel, what kind of power you have to do to get.
I mean,
to the
look
front,
at the graph. You can see it, 380 plus.
Whereas someone who was sitting on second wheel, like we also have a comparison in
Srinidhi's graph, yeah.
There's like a good 50-60 watt difference. So
I'd say 100 watt difference, but yeah.
That's why it got really difficult for Gagan to get back into the group.
Correct, because the pace was kept so high. And at this point, now the group is just 5 people. There's John, me, Imad, Srinidhi, and Rudra. We started with 11 people, now we have 5. So we rotate turns. I tell everybody to take 30-second pulls just to keep the pace high. But at this point, I could see that the speed was coming down when neither John and I were at the front. So I told John, go sit at the back.
Come right from the back, yeah?
And we've already had discussed as to where I wanted him to attack. Till then, I was going to be at the front. And that point of attack was going to be Egypt. The Egypt kicker actually starts with a descent and then it starts kicking up. So if you carry your speed from behind on the descent, you can get a lot of momentum into the climb, whereas somebody has to generate that speed on the climb is quite difficult. So which is what Srinidhi had to do. And he couldn't immediately get onto Don's wheel and Rudra kept unclipping.
Yeah, that's a little
sketch.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can see how much these guys have to work to try and get onto John's wheel. And this is the U-turn where group 3.
Yeah, so this is group 3, the group ahead of you. And before that, we had the second group, right?
Yeah.
So the thing with both of these groups was there's lack of cohesion.
Correct.
So in a handicap race, generally, this is a special case, but generally the idea is to work together with your group irrespective of what teams you belong to.
Correct. So the thing is, depending on what group you have a completely different goal. So if you're in the last group, you want to catch everybody. But if you're in the first group, your goal is to stay away.
Your group reaching the first U-turn.
First U-turn, yeah.
So that's John reaching the first U-turn.
And you can see, even though I attacked, I wasn't able to create much of a gap initially because of the traffic. I think Rudra and Imad had to burn a couple matches to get back.
So what was going into your head, like in this position?
I wanted to attack before the U-turn because I know after the U-turn it's a headwind. So I don't want anyone on my wheel in a headwind because the amount of power you're saving sitting on a wheel in a headwind section is huge. Like right now, I've got caught back onto John. I was sitting on his wheel. When I wasn't in the front and he was doing 300 watts in the front, I was doing around 200. So it's a huge amount of savings that you get sitting on the wheel. So which is why I wanted to attack before the U-turn. And this is Gagan and Sanjeev finally reaching the first U-turn. And like from the flybys.
What's the time?
Yeah, this is around 1.5 minutes down on us.
How is everybody looking on the road right now? Who's up ahead and what's the composition like?
So the current situation is John and me up ahead, around 10 to 30 seconds gap to the chase group, which is Rudra, Srinidhi and Imad. And then there's around a minute and a half to 2 minutes back to the third group, which is Sanjeev, Kiran, Raju and Gagan.
Right, so this is approximately 20 kilometers into the
Correct,
race.
we're around 20 kilometers.
And it's a 67 kilometer race.
Yeah, so we've got 2 more U-turns. And at this point, I told John exactly what I wanted him to do, which is 300 at the front, and then the moment that starts dropping, to pull off, and I go to the front.
No, some big watts.
I mean, yeah, if you can
Right.
put it out, why not?
Like, yeah,
Honestly.
I mean, well, so like just to give you a statistic, I think you guys were making up like 6 seconds every kilometer on the group that's chasing you.
Correct.
Until the last bit, and we'll get to what happens in the last.
I mean, yeah, that was crazy.
Right, but now you're catching up on other people, and here I give them a time check.
The time check around there was 30 seconds.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the chase group.
Yeah,
And
so-
you guys are also closing into more LBB riders. That's Ben,
Yeah.
who started a group before you.
Correct.
And you're closing up on him, and that's Steffi. Steffi is part of the second group.
So yeah, now we're coming up close to the first U-turn, but you guys make a quick pit stop to mark the finish line.
So this is the art. And this is the artist. Little light-hearted moment shared. And that's Ben. So that's your camera, right?
It is my camera.
Tell me
So
what's
I
happening.
shout at the moment I see him, I shout out to him, say, Ben, get on the wheel. But it also helped that you went ahead and told him that we're approaching. So I think with around 4 or 5 kilometers to the second U-turn, he hops on and he's able to sit third wheel to John and I and get a pretty decent draft.
Hey,
We-
that looks like a nice TTT.
We crossed by the what will be the finish line on the next lap. At this point, you give the guys a time check. These guys are the leftover guys from the third group, but this is the main group, the main chase,
Right.
and the gap at this point is a minute.
Right.
So now we're approaching the second U-turn,
Yeah,
and the
that's
attack was
35
made at the
kilometers.
first U-turn.
Right.
So we've gained a minute, roughly 10 kilometers.
That's the rate at which you guys were gaining up time. That's
Yeah.
a minute for every 10 kilometers. That's probably the math for pro pelotons when you have to bring back a chase.
Correct. If you're bringing back a breakaway, that's the
Right.
rule of thumb.
Right.
Yeah.
And you guys still have a lot of time to make, right? It's only a minute.
Correct.
Right, so I think what was your goal while going into the race? Because I think the race played exactly, as of now, it's played exactly as per your strategy.
Yeah, so I wanted John and I to just have a very hard ride. I mean, it's a good way, it's a good training stimulus as well. Ideally, we would have wanted Gagan as well to be there to, spice things up a bit. But I told John, 5 minutes to third place.
Right.
And that was the goal, 5 minutes to third place. Now let's talk about the dynamic in group 2, the chase group.
Right, so the chase group has, I'm guessing, 3 people by now.
Yes.
Right. And we're closing up. We haven't reached the second U-turn.
No,
the
we haven't.
last U-turn.
We haven't reached the last U-turn.
But all 3 of them are trying hard. They're taking pulls. That's Imad, Rudra, and Srinidhi.
Yeah.
And they're taking pulls, trying to close down the gap. But the gaps, again, like it's a steady linear curve at 1 minute per 10 kilometers. And
Yeah,
that's
but-
what you've been gaining on them
Yeah.
till now. As of now, the best strategy for the chasing group is you already have 3.5 minutes on them.
Yeah.
So, it's really hard to cover 3 minutes.
Unless something goes
No,
wrong in the front.
Unless you guys have a crash or something,
Yeah.
right? If I was there, I would have probably given up working and
Start thinking about your own result, right?
yeah, because the third place is up for grabs even now.
And now this, I think, is just after the last U-turn.
Yeah.
We're going through the Egypt Rumblers, and the group at this point is 3 minutes.
Right. So you guys have just passed, and I give everybody a time check of 3 minutes, and
Yeah.
Rudra's like, "Oh shit,
Yeah.
it's a lot of time," so he accelerates.
Yeah. And then the group behind them is Gagan, Sanjeev, and Kiran.
Right.
And they held a very consistent 30 seconds to a minute to the second group.
Yeah.
They weren't able to gain any time on them, and neither did they lose any time.
Right. That's Gagan and that's Kiran. Both of them rode really well. This is the point where they're crossing the leftovers from Group 3.
Correct.
And this is when Rajiv tries to hop on to the Gagan train. It's
Yeah.
a hard interval ride for Gagan. He's just been pulling the entire route.
Yeah.
Right. So we ask him for some water, but his bottles are full.
And he's just having fun on the
Yeah.
bike, which is what's great about these events.
At this point in time, I think 1-2 is decided.
Yeah,
between
it's
the
kind of
both
decided,
you.
and actually one is decided.
Oh, right. So what was the strategy?
So
before?
I told John after the last U-turn, because I think he was starting to struggle a little bit. So I told him, buddy, look, this is your win. I'm not fighting you for it, but I want you to work for it. So I made him take pulls, even though I was comfortable doing most of the pulling. I made him get to the front and
That's
pull
nice.
hard, make
Yeah.
him uncomfortable, make him suffer. And I told him, you only swing off when you're struggling, so you can get some rest.
I think this is the last kicker, and I can see you making
And
it-
this is when I'm suffering.
Yeah.
I'm putting 350 watts now up this kicker, and just before I send him to go take his first win in Bangalore. But at this point, if we go back to the group 2.
Oh, right. So the group 2 is has some fun dynamics because it's only the last 8 kilometers.
Yeah.
And there's Rudra, there's Srinidhi and Imad. All of them riders of same caliber. And what happens is Rudra and Imad team up and they start attacking Srinidhi. So we have like a small graph of how many attacks were there. I think the count is like
10
8
attacks.
to 10, yeah. That's a lot of
and
attacks.
Srinidhi told us that none of them were initiated by him.
So he was probably in a position where he's 2-on-1 and he's just responding to attacks.
Yeah, and let's also cut back to the start, which is he was the one who initially chased John
Right.
when John went. So he's
Right.
actually been in his anaerobic zone for
Yeah,
quite a bit.
long.
So I mean, and we spoke to him. He played he played the final bit exactly how I would play it. He told us that coming up to the last kicker, towards the end of the kicker, he decided to send a long attack. They had dropped Imad at the start of the kicker, but they were not riding up that kicker at any reasonable pace. So Imad was actually catching back on them.
Right.
And Srinidhi didn't want to be put in that 2-on-1 situation.
Yeah.
He's like 9 attacks with them.
Yeah.
So he decided, okay, he's going to launch now
Right.
before Imad catches
Yeah.
back up. And I think it was maybe just one
Yeah.
attack too many for him to be able to stay away.
Yeah.
He just came short
Yeah.
of getting the 3rd place. Coming in, when we could start seeing them, he was actually in front, but then Rudra was able to
And Rudra
kick
has a
from
snap
behind
to
him.
him. I've been in a situation like this with him, and he's got a snap, and he's a little heavier, so
Yeah.
I think that also helps.
Yeah.
And this is the rest of the group: Gagan finishing, Kiran, Raju, Rajiv.
And Rajiv, yeah. And this is Ben and Steffi.
Oh, the happy couple,
Yeah.
power couple, finishing. Both of them were really happy. They got to ride together.
Yeah, the whole idea behind the handicapped race is you're leveling the playing field. And man, hats off to Venki. We saw a post on Instagram. He's been doing these for 10 years now.
Yeah, wow.
Which is like quite insane. So,
Until next time.
ciao.